majority of breeds of dog have their origins within the last couple of 100 years or so. But Andrew Luck Baker now goes walking with an enigmatic and melodious canine which has a prehistoric pedigree and which, some claim, is man's oldest best friend.
Dog is it?
It's a New Guinea singing dog.
Say it again?
It's a New Guinea singing dog.
New Guinea singing dog. We thought you had a fox on a leash.
That's what everybody thinks. No, they're a wild dog from New Guinea that might be on the verge of extinction.
Kind of can be a small dingo, maybe.
They're closely related to the dingo.
I'm pretty impressed. I thought it was a red fox.
Cool.
There used to be some in the London Zoo, and in the 1960s, when my children were little, we used to vocalize to these singing dogs, and they would really start singing back. So everybody used to gather around to listen to it, and it was a great sound.
Ear-grabbing and eye-catching. That's the New Guinea singing dog. It lives as both a companion to people. There are about 200 or so pet or captive study animals, most of them in the United States, and as a wild dog, with an unknown and diminishing number running free in the remotest parts of the vast West Pacific island of New Guinea. But it's their history that's most intriguing, not to say controversial.
This dog may be our best chance to look back in time to what the first dog that accompanied primitive man thousands and thousands of years ago around the world was like.
Goodness, no. They're just village dogs. I can show you pictures of dogs in China that you couldn't tell apart from the New Guinea singing dog. And I can buy them anytime I want. I just go to the dog market and buy one to take it home to eat. You know, they're just there. They're all over the place.
As someone who studies dogs, I have a lot of people contact me with interesting stories about things that different animals do. And so as an experimentalist, of course, you're a bit of a skeptic. But when I went and saw the singing dogs, I became a believer. These are very strange animals.
Our contention is that this is a type of dog that was never fully domesticated. It had to be tamed because it was transported from somewhere in Southeast Asia at some time in the past by humans, but we're not certain in what state of domestication, if any, they were in.
When the singing dog was discovered in the highlands of New Guinea in the 1950s, it was proclaimed a new species of wild canine, and zoos the world over wanted them. But they lost interest in the 1970s when many dog researchers decided the singer was in fact just a run-of-the-mill feral domestic dog. Not everybody, though. Jan Koller-Matznik is an independent dog researcher with 8 singers of her own. She runs the New Guinea Singing Dog Conservation Society from her home in the hills of southern Oregon. This small outfit aims to protect the dog in its native land and encourages scientists to study singers and their place in prehistory.
As we're going out, you can see that the kennels are made out of chain link. They have metal arms angling inward with wire on them to keep the singers from climbing and jumping out the top.
So they would escape if they could?
Oh, definitely, in a hot second. And that's their whole life desire, is to get out and go hunting.
Are we being greeted?
We are being greeted. They're saying, please come and pay attention to us. That's Corey. She's an older female telling a younger male named Jake that she doesn't appreciate him in her face. And you can see she's the normal red-brown coat color that the singers are.
Really quite fox-like, but the face quite dingo-like.
People think that they're fox-like when they first see them because they're so graceful and they're a little bit short-legged, and they have a tail that's very fluffy on the underside, which they often carry just hanging down. But actually, foxes have very small, skinny heads, and the singers have very broad heads. So they have this rather broad aspect when you look at them from the front.
As well as promoting conservation and research, Jankola Society also seeks out the right kind of human companions for captive bred singers. As pets, these predatory dogs are a handful, to put it mildly, which is why the Society's intensive selection process for prospective owners only lets through the likes of Alice Moon Fanelli. Alice is an expert on the behaviour of dogs and their wild relatives, the canids, at Tufts University in Massachusetts. To find out about life with a New Guinea singing dog, I went to meet her and her young dog Pan at her home in the New England countryside.
Hi, Andrew.
Alice.
Come on in.
Great to meet you.
It's great to meet you.
It's beautiful around here, isn't it?
Thank you. Did you have any trouble finding us?
Yes, but I won't go into that.
Okay.
It will take too long.
Okay.
Right, so let's meet Pan.
There he is, ready to greet you.
Hello, Pan. Well, he's certainly friendly, straight from the offset.
Oh, absolutely. He's been well socialized since he was 8 weeks old.
And you have a good sniff of the microphone, haven't you, Pan? He's clambering all over me. So how long have you had Pan?
A little over 2 years.
And has he changed your life?
Absolutely. In terms of the work that I do now, just observing his behavior and kind of getting on a handle on the difference between wild canids and domestic dogs, and this particular dog that's quite unique. He's much more social than some of the wild canids that I worked with, and yet he's not really domestic either. Jan warned me when I brought him home that they do climb trees, and it was pretty amazing. I was walking him out in the yard, and just his intense focus on what's above him and focusing on birds and going straight to trees. I thought I'll never be able to, we live in such a wooded area, I'll never be able to take him for walks. So I go back and forth. You know, there's an awful lot of wild characteristics, but he's adapted so well. Look how nice he sits on the furniture.
Pan is about 20 generations from wild New Guinea. Nobody knows how many singers still live on there. The animals are extremely elusive. The last sighting by a Westerner was 15 years ago. But singer aficionado Dr. Lear Brisbane, an ecologist at the University of Georgia, receives occasional reports that the dogs are still singing in the farthest flung places on the island.
At one point, we suspect they probably lived all over New Guinea. And now they seem to be restricted to certain pockets in the highest, most remote reaches of the Central Highlands. And interestingly, the New Guinea singing dog and birds of paradise seem to share the same kind of habitat. Right there on the edge of the cloud jungle forest and in the grassy savannas where the trees stop and you have nothing but grass on up the slope to the rocky crag. So it's in that transition where birds of paradise live and singing dogs live.
Somehow, the singing dog ended up in a land of outrageously plumed birds and where all the other mammalian creatures are either marsupials like tree kangaroos or small rodents. Actually, this situation is exactly like the wild dog just across the sea from New Guinea in Australia, the dingo. A lot of researchers see the singer as a smaller and more melodious variety. Until recently, how and when the dingo got to Australia was also a mystery. Then Alan Wilton at the University of New South Wales compared the genetics of dingoes, some singers, and hundreds of domestic dogs from all over the world.
The dingo and the New Guinea singing dog, from what we can gather, are sort of an archetypal dog. They're a unique sort of animal. It's what dogs were like 5,000 years ago, sort of halfway on the road to domestication. And they were brought to Australia, a very small number of animals brought to Australia about that time, by people that are either trading with the Aborigines or sailing and exploring around the place, and that they've taken off and gone wild and spread throughout Australia. There are anecdotal stories from Aboriginal communities about trading with Indonesian cultures, whether they came to New Guinea first and then spread down into Australia, or whether they came from Australia up into New Guinea, or whether they're two separate colonisation events. We don't have enough evidence to say yet, but the New Guinea singing dog and the Australian dingo seem to have probably come from a similar region in Asia about 5,000 years ago.
Are there dogs in that part of the world now that might be, the ancestors, if you like, of the dingo and the New Guinea singing dog?
If you travel throughout Southeast Asia, in many places you see these, what they're called pariah dogs, that hang around the edge of cities, just eking out a living from rubbish dumps and things like that. Look very much like dingoes. So the suspicion is, and nobody's been able to collect pure animals from those regions like Thailand and southern China and things like that. But the suspicion is they're the descendants from the New Guinea singing dog and the Australian dingo's ancestors.
These Southeast Asian scavengers are living the sort of life many believe the very first dogs did in Stone Age times. There's a popular theory that sometime between 20 and 10,000 years ago, some wolves began transforming into dogs by evolving to be less fearful of humans, so they could take advantage of a new ecological opportunity created by our ancestors' rubbish and waste. So could there be any dogs today that are true purebred relics of those early times? Jan Kohler argues the best bet is the New Guinea singing dog.
In Australia, all the wild so-called dingoes, 80% of them are actually domestic dog-dingo hybrids now, due to the long history of crossbreeding with imported dogs. Whereas where the singers live is from 5 to 11,000 feet in the mountains of New Guinea, so they've remained genetically isolated much more so than the Australian dingo.
A lot of scientists are skeptical that wild singers have been genetically isolated from outsider canines since they bolted to the highland forest 5,000 or possibly more than 10,000 years ago, according to Jan Kohler. Ray Coppinger, dog origins researcher at Hampshire College in Massachusetts.
Just take a look at New Guinea on the map. When you look at that whole area of Indonesia and New Guinea and all that area, to think that those animals could have been isolated for any period of time is kind of silly. You go back 10,000 years, even 5,000, 6,000 years ago, sea level between those islands was way down. You got people going back and forth between these islands. You got people eating dogs on all those islands and taking them out in their canoes and going to the other islands and so forth with them back and forth. They're just village dogs.
But keep your skepticism on hold, says Eileen Brisbane. What village dogs sound like these?
For example, there is this sound sequence that I call to-wee-a-wow. It goes high-pitched and comes down and goes a-wow at the end. And when one dog starts doing that, it seems to set the others off. But not to-wee-a-wowing. They start wow, and another one would go whoa, 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 whoa. And all these things are happening at the same time.
Singing ensemble, the dogs do sound remarkable. But as soloists, they're special too. Mark Feinstein, another researcher at Hampshire College, has analysed isolated singer howls, and he reckons they're quite distinct from those of other dogs and their wild relatives.
If you listen to a wolf howl, for example, wolves tend to have a very steady pitch howl.
Can you demonstrate?
Steady and long and not very varying in pitch. Other wild canids, for example, the coyote, have a slightly more complex howl, what some have called a yip howl, and it sounds something like yip, 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 yip. But if you listen to a New Guinea singing dog howl, it's a little more like this. There's a great deal of variation in pitch or frequency modulation. The pitch of the dog's voice is going up and down more dramatically than you find in most other canid species, reminiscent of the pitch changes, the note changes that you find in singing.
I mean, might there be a good reason for that?
Or is that just the way they happen to howl?
These dogs live in a very unusual and very complex environment, the difficult environment in which to make a sound signal that will get through that environment effectively if you're trying to communicate with your mate who's out foraging, for example.
What's difficult about it?
When you have a dense forest with lots of vegetation, trunks of trees, boulders, cliff faces, mountains suddenly rising up, it's likely that the sounds that you make are going to be reflected off of those surfaces or are going to be absorbed by the material in the world around you. Sounds of different frequencies tend to do better or worse in those kinds of environments. So one hypothesis is that the New Guinea singing dog, in this very complicated world it lives in, varies its pitch a lot so that some of its signal is able to get through. They may be hedging their acoustic bets, so to speak.
Well, that was quite a greeting.
Because you've got other people living nearby. Do you get many complaints?
No, actually, when my husband went and knocked on the door of the neighbor that lives right across the road behind the kennel, if the singing dogs were bothering her, she laughed and said, "Don't you hear me calling back? When I hear them, I throw my windows open and sing back to them."
One of the other possibly unique vocalizations that we find is a so-called trill sound, which is a very rapidly pulsing, vibrating sound, very high pitch, which the animal makes when it's very highly aroused. It sounds like...
I mean, that certainly doesn't sound like a dog sound.
Oh no, it's very bird-like sounding and not reported for any of the other canids, wild or domestic.
To Jan Kohler's mind, the singer's peculiarities are enough to make it a distinct species from other dogs. And it's not just the noises the dog makes.
I've described 252 behaviors in what's called an ethogram. It's like a dictionary of the behaviors that they do. And out of that, about 3% were either entirely unique and not seen in any other type of dog, or the singers do it differently, like they do a lot more or a lot less of it. Their vocalizations, for one. They also have this head toss behavior, which is very peculiar, and they take their head and they bend their neck to one side and roll their head around in a circle and back to the front. And this means I want. They will be making eye contact with whatever it is they want, and then they do their head toss. And they also all lack the play bow, which every other wolf, dog, fox, coyote, jackal does a stereotype play bow solicitation where they put their front end down on the ground and their rear is up in the air. I'm sure most people have seen dogs doing this. Singers never do that.
Not everybody's convinced all this indicates a separate species, or is that revealing about the ways of the archetypal dog of prehistory. Archaeozoologist Juliet Clutton-Brock is one of the world's authorities on the origin of the domestic dog. She thinks the Australian dingo or Asian prior dogs are more like the first dog. But she does think the New Guinea singer is a unique and fascinating mix of early domestication followed by rapid evolutionary change by natural selection.
The story I see myself about the Guinea singing dog is that very few dogs, were taken to Papua New Guinea by humans, say 5,000 years ago. And this was a founder group. And they then bred, obviously, and spread up into the mountains, a very harsh environment. And as a result of natural selection, they evolved into this unique-looking creature that we have today with this unique vocalization.
Natural selection also probably had a hand in sharpening the wits of these strange canines.
What I say they're like is a cross between a monkey and a cat hiding in a dog suit. They learn so fast. We call it one trial learning. You show them or they do something once and they've got it. So I can show them how to sit once and give them a reward and they'll remember it. Now, whether they're going to do it or not, is another matter. But yeah, one trial learning is exceptional, and the people that have been able to live with them full time, such as Alice Moon Finelli, have reported these amazing anecdotes of what their singers do. Did Alice tell you about Pan flushing the toilet?
Yes. Well, I had him with me at work.
So can we go to the scene of the story?
Oh, absolutely.
Right, so we're just walking into your bathroom here.
So I took him into the
Hands come to.
restroom. He'll be everywhere.
Better close the lid. He
Yes.
seems interested.
Yeah, well, I took him into the restroom, which was similar to this at work, because if I left him in my office with the door closed, he would howl and disturb the rest of the faculty. So I brought him in and finished up, and he was watching me as I flushed the toilet, and had a long lever sticking out of the side of the tank. And I walked over to the sink, which is a little bit further than this, and was washing my hands, and I saw him over there, and he was nosing the handle. And I thought, oh no, he's not going to flush the toilet, and I don't have a camera. I got to document some of this. And sure enough, he put one paw up on the lever, and then he put his second paw up. Now he's with both feet on it, and it flushed. And then he watches the water. He likes to watch the water, and we always kid that he's wondering why the water swirls the wrong direction here.
Oh yes, we're not in the right hemisphere really, for him, aren't we?
No, we're not. He thinks everything is backwards. So I think it's a curiosity thing. I mean, this is another example of how intelligent they are, that they can observe these things and their curiosity gets to them. Another thing that makes them a bit of a challenge to live with, where you have to really be on top of them, because who knows, I mean, what he watches me do. I might find him frying bacon or something, for all I know, and catch the house on fire.
We've seen New Guinea singing dogs solve problems that common domestic dogs seem to have trouble with. We had one male New Guinea singing dog who was able to solve the problem of opening the latch on his kennel run and escaping from the kennel, a latch which hundreds of other dogs had been confounded by. But it's fairly well understood that the wild canids tend to be generally better problem solvers of new and interesting problems than domestic dogs are. On average, wild canids, particularly wolves, have larger brains for their body size than domestic dogs do.
This isn't, of course, to say that today's domestic dogs are stupid. In fact, when it comes to the mental powers to read us humans, modern mutts seem to have acquired a unique communicative ability. In a series of tests, psychologist Brian Hare hid treats under one of two cups, and then gave different kinds of animal clues as to where the food was. Dogs put their wild ancestors, the wolves, and even chimpanzees, to shame with their superior skill at understanding pointing, gestures, and eye gaze. When Brian heard about the New Guinea singing dogs and their history, he was keen to make the trip from Harvard University to rural Oregon to test Jan Kola-Matznik's animals.
Dogs may have evolved during the process of domestication the special ability to communicate with humans, and that's sort of how they became the champion. Now, New Guinea singing dogs offer an interesting test of that hypothesis, because if it requires exposure, tremendous exposure over generations to humans, then the New Guinea singing dogs, who you know have not lived together with humans for thousands of years, they shouldn't be quite as good as dogs at reading these social cues, or they should be somehow different.
How did the singers do then?
It was very interesting. The singing dogs do read human social cues, and they do seem to be better than wolves. But they read human social cues in a different way, or I should say they read different cues. So, in particular, they're very, very skilled at reading physical cues. So if a human being, for instance, puts down a block of wood next to the cup where the food is hidden, they're really good at finding the food. But if the human points to where the food is, so they use a gesture, a communicative gesture, the singing dogs are lost. They look a lot like wolves. So it's almost as if they're somewhere between wolves and dogs.
A finding that chimes in with Alice Moon Finelli's Conversations with Pan.
His behaviors are so truncated and primitive. Domestic dogs have more sophistication, more subtlety to their communication, and he's just like, boom, boom, boom. It's almost like talking to a caveman. I am Pan.
Oh, what's he done? Or is he taking?
He's taking your car keys. Let's see, this is what I mean. We're not paying.
And it ends up, we've done some tests that make it seem as if the singing dogs, relative to dogs, are more interested in objects. They like humans, they're not aggressive towards humans, but they're not like our pet dogs who are obsessed with us.
After meeting them, were you tempted to get one yourself?
Well, they seem to be very interesting dogs for sure, but I have a hard enough time with my Chow Chow.
Ouch! Come out of there! Daru! Oh my God. Their coat is so thick, she can just go through these brambles like they're not even there. I am pulling with all my might to get this small dog out of there. What?
Once Jan had extracted Daru from the brambles, we sat down to talk about the future of the singing dog on New Guinea. Jan's worried. She knows she's unlikely to get the science establishment to reclassify singers as their own canine species. But she believes that's crucial to getting big conservation organizations to recognize wild singers as worth saving.
Without that, they're doomed, because more and more domestic dogs are being taken into the highlands of New Guinea, and the wild dogs will eventually go the way of the dingo unless domestic dogs are kept out of their territory. That's all it will take to save them, is to engage the local people, to work with us to keep domestic dogs away from the singing dog territory. Since singing dogs are not in conflict with humans in any way in their native range, it's going to be very inexpensive to do.
But the problem is they look like just dogs. And no zoo or conservation organization wants to put up money to save dogs in New Guinea. And until you begin to realize how unique these animals are, until you've worked around them and lived with them and thought about their story, you don't begin to get an appreciation of them. And yet, when the story gets told, people get fascinated. My concern is they're going to get fascinated too late.
Dog prehistorian Juliet Clutton-Brock is sympathetic. She doesn't think the singer is a separate dog species, but she would be very sad to see it disappear.
It is a relic of living heritage. It is a relic of ancient domestic dogs that were taken to New Guinea and haven't been changed by people, by artificial selection ever since. And secondly, because it's very interesting and it does have this unique vocalization. It would be a pity if our grandchildren don't know anything about the New Guinea singing dog.
The New Guinea Singing Dog was presented and produced by Andrew Luck Baker.